Good morning. My name's Henry Butler. I'm the Dean of Antonin Scalia Law School. Welcome to George Mason University's Arlington campus. It's a real pleasure to have you here and to welcome you for this conference that's co-hosted by our National Security Institute and the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. This has been an incredible month for us at Scalia Law. We started off with a fundraising dinner on October 3rd, where we raised $1.4 million for the Maureen McCarthy Scalia Scholarship Fund, which is our first need-based scholarship fund at the law school. That's a big step for us. The next day, we had 5 Supreme Court justices here as we unveiled a new statue of Justice Scalia. That's a pretty big thrill for our students to be in the same room with 5 Supreme Court justices, so that was great. This is kind of a bookend of our month that's included a lot of other programs, including last week we had a special seating of the Court of Appeals of Virginia here, which is another great opportunity for our students. We've also been hosting a number of programs over the last month, which has really been showcased a lot of the activities we have at the law school. We had a major conference on the prospects, the economics of criminal justice reform, where we had Attorney General Mark Herring speak to that group. We've also had a variety of programs where our centers are stretching out around the world. Our Global Antitrust Institute last week held a 3-day conference in Japan for Japanese regulators and judges dealing with competition policy. So we're touching a lot of things. My favorite conference of the past month, though, was the one that our Boyden Gray Center for the Study of the Administrative State had, and that conference was on the architecture of bureaucracy. The theme of it was to try to explain why government buildings are so ugly. But it's been a big week, and we've touched on a number of things. Just a quick note about our law school and the way things are going here. We're currently ranked number 16 in the world according to the Shanghai rankings of world universities. I'd never heard of that ranking until a couple years ago, but when we ranked us 16th, I loved it. Okay, but we also, a recent ranking came out and ranked our faculty number 19th in the country in terms of scholarly impact based on the number of citations of our scholars. So we're very proud of that, and it reflects a long history of our school with a great commitment to law and economics research. The university, one final bragging point about that, George Mason University is a Tier 1 Carnegie research university. To give you a sense of what that means, when we came on the list, we bumped off Dartmouth. Okay, so that's a big step for our school. We love having outward-facing programs like this, so it's a real pleasure to welcome all of you. I'm going to turn it over now to the director of our National Security Program, Jamil Jaffer. Jamil has been an incredible leader as he's built this center very quickly. But most importantly for me, he has clerked twice for Neil Gorsuch, once on the 10th Circuit and then on the Supreme Court. And as a result of that, Neil Gorsuch is now a faculty member here at our law school. Please give a warm welcome to Jamil Jaffer.
Well, thank you all for coming. I realize that Chuck and I are all that stands between you and a U.S. Senator and a very distinguished panel, so I'll make it very quick. Welcome to the National Security Institute at George Mason's Antonin Scalia Law School. We're a new startup think tank inside the law school, about 1.5 years old. Our goal is to bring real-world solutions to difficult national security problems, and so we've assembled a great group of folks to do that, a great group of advisors, including Chuck and including Tish. And a great group of visiting fellows from around the country, lawyers, non-lawyers alike. So we'd love to get you involved with the law school. We'd love to get you involved with the National Security Institute. There's materials outside if you're interested. But my real responsibility here today is to introduce Chuck Alsup, who's been a great friend and a super mentor to me. Chuck is the president of INSA, the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. After a 4-decade-long career in the federal government serving our country around the world, including at the Office of Director of National Intelligence, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and as a member of the U.S. Army for 28 years. Chuck Alsup, please introduce yourself.
Well, I wasn't expecting that. Okay, well, welcome, and happy Thanksgiving Eve, okay? I hope you've all got your costumes ready, okay? Oh, yeah, Halloween Eve, sorry, Halloween. Sorry. Okay, Jamil got me shook up there, okay? Okay, so thanks, Jamil, and thanks to George Mason University for hosting us in this great facility here today. The university's National Security Institute is a thought leader on legal, geopolitical, defense, and intelligence issues, and INSA is always glad to partner with NSI. So we look forward to future events together. Thanks to all of you for being here today. Hopefully we'll have a few more drift in here as we go along. As many of you know, INSA is a nonpartisan association dedicated to promoting public-private collaboration on a variety of intelligence and national security issues. What Jamil said, we do too, and the partnership is natural for us to do things together. INSA recognizes the close partnership between IC agencies and their industry colleagues, and we work to make sure this cooperation is as effective and efficient as possible. We are always pleased to foster dialogue between industry executives and intelligence community leaders from both the executive and legislative branches. So we are pleased to convene this panel today for a robust exchange of views on the state of security clearance reform. We're quite fortunate to have some folks that are kind of well-recognized leaders in this area. So for me personally, we're going to do a proper introduction here momentarily, but for me personally, I want to say thanks, Senator Warner, for being here with us today. Thanks for your leadership on this particular issue, and thanks for your leadership for our nation. Sue, as always, thanks for all you do for INSA, for all you do for the IC, for all you do for our nation. And Kevin, thanks for being the voice of industry. I think many of you know, but some of you may not know, but Kevin kind of has pulled together about 16 CEOs to be a voice of industry and really focus some attention on this critical issue. So thanks for all of you for being here today. So with that, let me talk a little bit about how this panel is going to proceed. And there may be a brief interruption in the middle of it because Sue has gotten an offer downtown that she can't refuse later this morning. And she probably is going to quietly get up, but not before we ask her some hard questions. And one of the things I'm going to ask you is to make sure that one hard question you had for Sue, you get on your card and you get it over to the aisle here so we can make sure we ask that hard question before she leaves, okay? So with that, this is how we're going to proceed. We have about an hour and a half to talk with this distinguished panel. Tish is going to moderate a discussion that'll go 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll get to the audience questions. But we're going to make sure we ask an audience or question or two before Sue has to leave us, okay? And then we'll keep going once that happens. When you entered the auditorium, hopefully you got some cards, okay? If you didn't get some cards, raise your hand now and we'll get some cards to you, okay? Some 3x5 cards, okay? So if you do have questions, write it down, pass it to the aisle, and someone from INSA or George Mason, one of our interns, will collect them. For those of you who got the coveted aisle seats, we just deputized you to help us in this process, okay, to get things to run smoothly, so don't mess it up, okay? So when the card comes to you, just hold it up, kind of, don't wave or stand up or anything, just hold it up and one of our staff members will come by and get it, okay? We'll get the questions up to Tish, and as time allows, we'll get those questions asked, okay? If you need index cards, again, say so right now so we don't disrupt the discussion later. One other constituency I need to mention, we had some supporters, some sponsors for today's event, and they're the folks that make it possible to do things like this. So Thomson Reuters Special Services, Mantech, the Chertoff Group, General Dynamics Information Technology, and SAIC. So join me in a round of applause for them. Okay, and with that, Thomson Reuters was our premier sponsor, and they asked that we have the legendary Charlie Allen from the Chertoff Group provide some brief remarks. So I think most of you know Charlie, 47 years in the CIA, rose to its highest ranks, 4 years as an Undersecretary of Homeland Security. But importantly for this topic today, Charlie, for about 10 years, has been leading INSA's efforts on security clearance reform. And he has doggedly kept focus on this issue. So we all are thankful for Charlie for his stubbornness in making sure we get something done on this. So with that, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Great honor to be here. And one thing I was always evaluated back at CIA was that I was always incredibly tenacious on every issue. And I think that I think security clearance reform exemplifies the challenges. I really want to thank George Mason University and INSA for putting this together jointly. It's a tremendous opportunity, certainly with the panel that we have here. Security clearance reform, based on my years in working it, is just vital. It's vital that we be successful. It's vital that we have optimism about it, because Sue Gordon this morning has the optimism and the energy, I think, that exemplifies what's required. If we're going to do this in order to have a more secure nation, a more secure process for handling sensitive, trusted security clearances for this country. We have been, these are simply my observations, we've become paralyzed by a commitment to almost zero risk. And that's not just in security clearances, but in a lot of other areas of intelligence and defense. We obviously will never have zero risk in what we do. We seem to have an inability to adapt to the changing environment, to the digital 21st century, and what it brings in technology and the availability of data and how to use the data. Threats have evolved. Information is easily available to us, but it's very fragile, it's very perishable, it moves on. Government cannot function effectively in the digital way by the way we did security clearances in the 1980s. And let me tell you, the SF-86 has not been modernized. Having just filled it out again, they've added another 30 questions to it, which I wonder, is there ever an end to how we do SF-86s? The trusted workforce has three pillars. It has the government civilians, it has the military personnel, and it has contractors. And to solve this problem, we have to have great collaboration with industry. There has to be that government-industry partnership, truly. Now, Kevin Phillips is here, runs Mantech, but he's taken upon himself to do so much to help make that partnership more believable and real. He's been a tower of strength, and I'm just delighted that he's part of this group. And just speaking of Thomson Reuters Special Services, as a member of the Chertoff Group, I've worked with Thomson Reuters Special Services. It's one of the great sponsor for this event, and we really appreciate what TRSS is doing and its expertise in technology, analytics support to the community, as well as to law enforcement. It focuses on cybersecurity, insider threats, supply chain risks, which are very grave, terrorists and criminal networks, and a host of other security threats. TRSS cannot hire the top talent it needs without changes in the way we do security processing. But you haven't come to listen to me. You've come here to listen to the panel. It's a superstar group of people. I'll now turn this discussion over to Tish, with whom I had the honor of working for many years, and she is well known not only as head of NGA, but as a career intelligence professional who will ask those hard, penetrating questions. Over to you, Tish.
Okay, thanks, Charlie, very much. Thanks for that kind introduction, and thank you for all you have done for our nation and all that you continue to do. Thanks to everyone for being here today to discuss security clearance reform, a critical issue that we all know has significant implications for our nation's security. Now, unlike most national security issues that get discussed here on this stage, This topic is not a topic of geopolitics, but rather a debate over how to build and sustain a workforce that we can all trust to manage the sensitive business of government, which of course requires both security and the trust of the public. Nor is this topic an analysis of the threat posed by some foreign country. On this topic, we have met the enemy, and it is us. It is us for not having modernized this process over time. Charlie talked about the SF-86. Agencies have discussed this situation for a long time, and I will tell you, I think not until recently has much work really been done. So, we're going to talk about all that's been done in the recent past. Efforts to modernize the clearance process involve three principal actors, as Charlie talked to, all of which are represented on the stage this morning. First, Congress. Congress creates a statutory framework and provides both the funding and legal authorities that enable executive branch agencies to recruit, manage, and retain the government's trusted workforce. Just as critically, Congress also engages in continual oversight of the executive branch's work, ensuring that government efforts are effectively advancing national security and weighing in with new legislation that may be needed to improve performance. We are pleased to have with us here today one of the leading proponents of strong congressional oversight of the intelligence community, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, who serves as Vice Chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And Senator Warner will share his insights on the current clearance process and his view from the Hill on measures that could make it more efficient and effective. And in fact, some of those have just been included in the Intelligence Authorization Bill that passed his committee and is now awaiting action on the Senate floor. Second, we have the executive branch. The executive branch implements the clearance process. Efforts are already being undertaken to make the existing process more efficient. Centralize responsibility for investigations and adjudications at the Department of Defense. Make greater use of electronic data and software tools that can both speed up the investigation and generate more comprehensive insights on personnel security, and implement a continuous evaluation process for individuals who are already part of the trusted workforce. The Office of the DNI, as the security executive agent, issues the policies and standards that will guide changes to investigations and adjudications, as well as guide the implementation of a continuous evaluation program. Principal Deputy DNI Sue Gordon is here with us this morning to tell us about the ODNI's perspective on the policies and procedures that are needed to bring the clearance process into the 21st century. Sue's personal engagement is a sign that the ODNI is placing a great emphasis on the need to reform the clearance process, and I dare say, to do it right. Third, industry supports agencies throughout the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and other federal agencies conducting classified work. Cleared contractors make up a substantial portion of the trusted workforce. The firms that work in this space need a clearance process that functions efficiently so they can execute the tasks given to them by government agencies. Kevin Phillips, the president and CEO of Mantech, is a leading voice on the need for smart security clearance reform and has led a coalition of 16 CEOs who have sought to focus awareness on this issue. And Kevin will share private sector perspectives on the challenges and on the reform process that is underway. Just a reminder that this event is on the record. INSA is recording the discussion. We will post the video later this week, and clearly the press is here as well. So with that, let's finally get this discussion underway. And let me start with a question, a broad question for all three panelists. What does success look like, and how do we measure it? Senator Warner, would you like to kick off the conversation?
Sure. Well, first of all, just thank you, you and INSA, for being willing to host this function. Thank George Mason one more time for always being willing to open his doors for so many issues that are important to all of us around the region, and for that matter, around the Commonwealth and the country. This has been something I've followed for some time, but really was when Kevin and Bobby Kilberg and the NVTC kind of sat me down and we kind of got into some of the details. That I saw this constant problem had literally got to a crisis stage. You know, when we're talking about backlogs that are 740,000 plus, when we're thinking about young agents potentially joining the CIA waiting 2 years before they get cleared, or folks in the private sector waiting in limbo for huge periods of time, simply moving from one contract to another within a single DHS, for example, you know, we got a problem. And I think even more immediately when we think about that, we're talking about this mostly obviously in the context of DOD and the IC, but if we look at just the two tragedies of the last 2 weeks, the individual who tried to assassinate former presidents, vice presidents, members of the media, or the just horrific tragedy at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, I mean, there's a role for cleared and secure, trusted workforce in law enforcement as well. So this is not simply a problem. It says, as Dan Coates said, it is a crisis. And at least from the intelligence community standpoint, I think we've gone about trying to educate everyone, both how broken the process is, and think about that answer, and I will get to it very briefly, on what success looks like. The best news I think we've got on taking this problem on is when Dan Coates acknowledged at ODNI that this was not just a problem, but a crisis and needed not incremental, but revolutionary change. And he put the best change agent, I would argue, inside the IC on the job in terms of Sue's work and her corresponding counterpart to a degree, Admiral Joe Kernan on the DOD side. I know she'll speak to that, but they are working in tandem, and I think we're finally starting to see progress. What does progress look like to me? It's really 4 or 5 items. One, clearly we've got to get that backlog down. While it was at 740, we're down to 660. That's great, but not nearly good enough for the end of this year. We need to make sure that we've got active metrics on an ongoing basis where we measure, at least on a quarterly basis, where we get agreed upon goals on how we're going to bring the backlog down. Secondly, we need to not have an aspirational goal, but we need to have a real goal for both the government and the contracting community that 90% of all secret clearances ought to be able to be done in 30 days, and top secret clearances ought to be able to be done in 90 days. And then in terms of process change, we need to really make sure that the notion that we all use in terms of our terminology of continuous evaluation doesn't just become a phrase, but becomes a reality. And a part of that will mean moving past the 1970s version of sending retired FBI agents out to check college transcripts or criminal histories. Clearly, there's a lot of information tools that we can use to bring that into the 21st century. And finally, in many ways, particularly for our contracting community, we have to recognize very few people, either on the governmental side or on the contracting side, are going to work in the same firm for 35 years. They're going to move around. They're going to move to different contracts. So even if we get that initial clearance down, unless we can do clearance reform with vigorous and real reciprocity, we're just pushing the rock up the hill, and it's keep the weight of it rolling down the hill is just going to overcome any of the progress we'd make. So get the numbers down, hit that goal of 90% in 30 days and 60 days respectively, continuous evaluation, new technology tools, and reciprocity. Those are going to be the things that I'm going to look at. And I can tell you, at least from the Intel Committee's position, and sometimes our competition makes this a little bit easier, but we are absolutely bipartisan and unanimous in making this a high priority for the committee on a going forward basis.
So Senator Warner, I think you just set up the rest of the questions for this session here this morning. But before we get to those, Sue, what does your definition of success look like, and how do we measure that? How do we get there?
So since I don't want to be accused of filibustering, you're going to take my gratitude and thanks for all the folks here. And I think the senator said it exceptionally well. So my definition of success is we have the right person at the right place in the right time, with the confidence that they are worthy of the trust the American people place in them when they give them access to this special information. And that has to happen at a rate that allows us to meet demands. The senator has suggested several criteria that we can use as metrics of that progress, and I think they're all very good, but it really is about that. I was talking to someone about all the initiatives we have in the intelligence community on artificial intelligence and on data and on private sector partnership. And someone commented to me that we have one called Right Trusted Agile Workforce, and if we got that right, we wouldn't worry about any of the others. Because if you have the people in the place they need to do their jobs, the rest of it will be taken care of. So Dan Coates is right, this is a crisis. The senator's right, we should be focused on it. I'm devoted. There are a lot of issues from getting from here to there. There are issues of policy, there are issues of standards, and there are issues of implementation. Each have their own issue, but we have to have it be independent of whether you're a staff or whether you're a contractor, that you have the same access. We require, as a community, this whole population to serve the American people. There are differences, but there cannot be differences in our ability to get the right people in the right jobs. And some of those right jobs are in the private sector, and some of those right jobs are within the government. And our access to those people at the rate we need them has got to be equivalent.
Very good. Kevin?
So I'll filibuster for a minute. Send my appreciation to you, Senator Warner, and the Senate Committee on Intelligence for all your leadership in this, as well as you, Principal
Thanks.
Deputy Director Gordon.
Or Sue?
Sue, yes, ma'am, Sue. Okay. Military man, I apologize. On your leadership as well, I know it's very important. And Charlie, I'm going to send you a Christmas card. You say nicer things about me than my own mother does. I'm just saying, that's amazing. Okay. And INSA for your leadership on this as well. Volume, velocity, and security. The first two are big data terms, to people as talent. So I'm going to use a big data term to say that volume, velocity, and security have to be of equal weight in getting the talent needed to support national security. If we don't include all of those, we will not defend against the risks outside of our nation because we're focused on the risks inside of our own walls. They all have to come together. If we collectively, as a community holding people who hold positions of trust, work towards that goal, we'll make this work. Within that, a single, for every level of classification that exists, a single application, a single investigation, a single adjudication, so that the clearance follows the person. It's portable, it's reciprocal, it's automatically accepted, and exceptions are rare, not normal. That's what we're looking for.
Well said. So Kevin, you mentioned that risk word. Charlie talked about risk as well. And one of the things Charlie said is, we're always looking for zero risk. And that's just not achievable, just not attainable. And Senator Warner, in your bill, you're requesting the PAC, the committee that is overseeing this process, to report to Congress on a risk framework. So Sue, have you started on that risk framework? I realize the bill hasn't been signed yet, but
No,
we often get started
we know
before
what's coming.
Congress. Exactly.
He isn't shy.
So what does that risk framework look like? How do you develop it? You have agency directors, you have the security community, you've got cleared industry. How do you develop it, and then how do you get all of them to buy into the process?
I would agree that we haven't gotten where we need to go yet in terms of outcome. But I think there are some things we're doing now, particularly on the framework, that are going to be the foundation for this. So the first thing is that it's not only a whole of government, it really is a whole of country effort that we have going on when you include industry. And so we have groups looking at what we call the Enhanced Security Framework that will provide the standard from which investigative standards and adjudicative standards will follow, and all will be able to use the same. Because if you think about how we grew up from small to big, from few to many, everyone looking at the same objective and each developing their own version. So the foundation of the framework is to have a common set of understanding from which you can develop standards. So the elements are, what are you trying to protect? What are the characteristics of a trusted person? Who are those trusted people? What is the information you need to look at in order to be able to establish that trust? And then what are the data sources that you go after in order to be able to do that? And so the framework starts from that and then builds down into the standards against it. We have had so many tiers, so many levels, so many definitions of suitability and security, and the question is, how do you bring those together to this notion of what are you protecting, what is a trusted person, and then how do you build standards that have to go back to that? I believe by the end of this year that we will have that in place, that we can promulgate, and then we can build that out as a community. And that's the first step to how we're going to move forward, is you have to get it so that everyone can use the same standards, and they are understandable and common enough that they can be applied regardless of what the acting agency is on those.
And is industry involved in the development
They
of
are.
this? Okay, and so Kevin, how are you looking at what is being developed? Is it different from the way industry approaches risk? And are you satisfied with where we are in the process? Which, oh, by the way, we do have on record the end of the year, we'll have this framework.
300,000? No, I'm kidding. So specific to this issue, there's a lot of work being done. When these get conveyed, there's going to be a lot of a baseline of capability for us to all work around, move towards the same objective. I would say that industry specific to security clearances doubles up the effort because we have to test the people before they even apply because it takes so long. So we're literally having to do that when in many cases, thinking about not necessarily the security side, but the fitness or suitability side, there are standards we don't even know what they are. We're having to guess because we're not informed. Right. We're not informed. So we're taking a lot of components and try to bring them together to bring the right person into the right position, not always knowing what that is. And then from a business risk standpoint, we have to apply performance on the contract, the ability to get the talent, and the trustworthiness of the talent to meet national security needs or the customer needs. And they have to come together holistically, which is why, frankly, this letter that happened last year from the CEOs was driven because that's a risk-based communication. We can't meet the requirements without this issue being raised. Right. All you have to do is look at that letter. That's a CEO risk-based action.
Yeah, exactly. So, Senator Warner, does this approach work for you? Do you think this is going to get to what the committee was looking for?
Well, I think it's good to go back to what Charlie said as well. This notion that you can ever get to a risk-free environment.
You will not.
You're not going to get there. And frankly, missing out on good talent because folks don't want to wait a year or 2 years to get a security clearance poses a national security risk as well. And so part of, I think, what's incumbent upon Congress to do is, yes, keep the pressure on the IC, DOD, and contractors to mitigate as much risk as practical, but then not jump down their throats if a mistake is made. And one of the things that we're trying to do is, from the committee standpoint, is meet with the PAC on a regular basis to keep the pressure on them. As we started this process, I think DOD and IC were pretty good. I think OMB was a little slow to the table. I frankly think DHS is still slow to the table. So we've got to keep urging them forward. But they've got to set the framework. We're not going to mandate in legislation that basic framework. So we're going to keep the pressure on Sue to make sure we get to that into the year timeframe.
No, we will, and it doesn't sound very exciting to say that you're going to have investigative or adjudicative standards. But if you think about what takes the time, it is someone who is deciding what risks they're going to take based on the person in the position, on the security and the suitability. And if that isn't defined in some standard lexicon, in some standard process, you can't then do what you're begging us to do, which is to have metrics on people demonstrating that they have moved against those. So it doesn't sound very exciting to have those, and yet the prospect that we have a community that includes both these communities who are on the threshold of being able to agree to those, that is a big deal. There is a second big deal coming, which is how do I work with all the organizations that have to implement those? And that's when we have to deal with big data differently. We have to look at modernization of our processes, and that will come too. But I really do believe that common standards, common understanding of what that framework is an important move.
And let me just add one quick thing here is that
Please.
you've made mention of the fact, and I think we will get the Intel bill across the line. We've got a whole section of the bill that focuses on this issue. But a lot of the major components are already law in the NDAA. So we've viewed this as a dual process. And I think one of the things that Kevin's mentioned, Sue's mentioned, is really important. It appears to me that what's evolved over the last couple of years has been everybody setting their own standards. And now we're trying to force them into some level of compatibility. My hope is with this new basic framework of responsibility, you almost start with the presumption that everybody's in, and then if you have to carve out an exemption to take the agency, one we've talked about in the past, that may need a higher level, they take them out, but we start with the premise of everybody in the bucket in terms of common standards and reciprocity. And one of the things that Kevin's helped educate me on, and I think I'm going to need further education on, is what can the private sector do to get, even before the process starts, how much can the government give over to the private sector to do on their own before this even kind of starts with a governmental process?
And we've had this discussion for a while now. In a little different angle, if you will, let's talk about continuous evaluation. So a number of questions from the audience having to do with continuous evaluation. Senator Warner, you mentioned that that's one of your measures of success when we can get to continuous evaluation. So Sue, what does it actually mean? I mean, here's just a couple of things as you think about the answer to this. Will the intelligence community accept continuous evaluation from DoD? Will the implementation of continuous evaluation eliminate the need for periodic reinvestigations? So will the information using big data, will it be evaluated in big time? Will it provide more comprehensive insights?
Little time. We're hoping big data will be evaluated in little time.
Did I say more time?
You did.
Real
You said
time.
big time, and I thought, oh, it's a trick question.
No, I meant real time. I meant real time. So will it speed up the security clearance process?
So let me see if I can take those answers in order. So continuous evaluation is the notion of having access to a fixed number of data streams that if you had access to, then they would provide insight into the behaviors of the individuals that you care about. And right now, we have 7 data streams, credit, law enforcement, that the ODNI has made available, and 20 agencies have signed up to be a part of continuous evaluation, and 15 more that are working on MOUs to be able to do it. So it is, in fact, in play right now. Then, so that's good, right? Common standards, common service, all good stuff with the potential to be able to do it. Will it replace periodic investigations? It should. It should be able to get there, but there's still a gap we have to cross, which is people who do adjudications have got to be able to use the data, sense it in real time, and then be able to make a decision such that they don't have to go back and do something. That is absolutely the goal. So it should be able to replace that. And think about what that does in terms of investigative resources that allowed us to work off the people that have never had a clearance. And so the benefit of that. If I have an issue that we have not yet solved, and that is those tools necessary in order to be able to use that data real time to make an adjudication, to make a decision about those. Luckily, we're working both with and the Department of Defense, as well as the intelligence community, recognizes that artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics are the tools that we need on many fronts. We think this one is particularly well designed to be able to help that. But I have to work with the agencies that are the implementers to make sure that they have the resources in order to bring this to bear. So the ODNI has kind of two roles here. One is the security executive agent that sets the policies. We're working hard on that. The second is the leader of the intelligence community. And then hopefully with my other PAC members, advocates for the rest of the government to be able to put the tools into play. So we should be able to, but there's a gap there in terms of implementation that we still have to work on, Tish.
And it sounds like industry can help with that.
Oh, big time.
And so Kevin, maybe two perspectives here. How can you help? But also, what do you need to see data-wise from the government to help implement continuous evaluation within industry? And how does it help with your insider threat programs?
We're gonna run out of time on her time with that.
Keep going.
Okay,
know.
take any part of that.
Let's start with continuous evaluation. It would be very nice if all of the government agreed and everybody that has responsibility for the trusted workforce, meaning every company who has trusted workforce in its ranks, knows what that common data set is so we can all adhere to it. My hope is that, my fear is that 10 years from now we have different ones that are another reason for crossovers and transfers not to happen. If there's not commonality now, there's only going to be extension of time and probably later. So it's a very important point in time to get that addressed.
That gets back to those standards
All
Sue
the
was talking about.
Government-wide standards for trust,
Right.
right? And using collection and analysis and AI for CE to do that. Industry then can use the same standards to define its trust and put into its insider threat. Without that and information sharing, the insider threat is hollow because we don't know what our employees are doing at a government facility. It has to, if we're going to be co-responsible for people of trust, which we should be, then we have to figure out how to do that together and make it uniformly applied and available to the entities that hold trustworthy individuals.
So can I jump in on that one?
If you would, and then I want to ask
Yeah,
Senator
and
Warner.
I'll do this in a tweet.
That's not normally the best way to communicate.
Okay, two tweets. Okay, so.
I know who you work for these days, but tell me, actually, why don't you give them a real answer?
All right, so, God, I lost my train of thought. Oh, be gentle. Let's see. We'll talk about information sharing between the government and the private sector, which is always sporty, but I think this is an area that you can really help with because that privacy thing is vexing and actually in statute, and so that's probably something to work to be able to do the sharing that we need. But in another sense, we have other information sharing we need to do even within our organizations, and this is one of the things we're working on, Trusted Workforce 2.0. I need to get my HR processes and my security processes closer together, right? So that what I know about someone's performance and what I know about someone's security standing can come together, and it's that same sort of thing that I think will allow us to have more confidence. So the notion of bringing data sets together, bringing common knowledge together, sporty across government industry barrier, but still needs to be done within the government so that we get that whole picture. And the better your whole picture, the more likely you are to be able to understand the risk you're assuming.
So you brought up the privacy piece, which is what I wanted to ask Senator Warner about. We're talking about gathering a lot of data on a continuous basis on all of these people. Does this raise concerns? And is Congress thinking about how we balance security and privacy?
Taking them in that order, obviously, we are thinking about
Yes.
security and privacy. You know,
I know you're
and
thinking
as somebody
about
who's spent a good bit of time, learning and trying to think through what the guardrails ought to be on social media, there's an intersection point. I think most Americans probably don't realize that Facebook and Google know much more about each and every one of us than USG does. So if these other tools are out there, how we think about their rights and responsibilities in the intersection with government is an area we need to think through. And also, if there is then specific changes in law, we need to take on that challenge. And I think on this subject, at least, you would find very, very broad bipartisan support. 3 other quick things I think that we have to do, and I've spent time with both Sue and Kevin on this, is that while we may not be able to mandate that, for example, universities have to share in a user-friendly way college transcripts, or that local law enforcement has to share criminal records, we sure as heck can set incentives in place that say if you want federal resources, the amount of those or the ease of those may be increased if you share this information to help us make sure that we've got that trusted workforce and we don't have to use. One of the things I think that drove most of my members more crazy than anything was the idea of sending a human being out to check out college transcripts or to go back to a local jail and check somebody's criminal record. Makes no sense in an era where we've got different types of obviously much greater information sharing. And frankly, one of the things we also have to do, and this is where we need to do some work and have to work with OPM and OMB, is to make sure that agencies, in terms of their own budgeting process, don't put the security clearance part to the back of the line. That this, whether this becomes a line item in a budget that has to be reported on a regular basis, but that we make sure that we keep the resources flowing.
Yep.
So you don't end up building up this backlog that then becomes in and of itself a huge budget hurdle. It no longer becomes part of the built-in base budget. It becomes a line item, a separate problem in and of itself.
Sue, I'm mindful of the time.
I do, I need to roll.
Any last?
Now give her one more
Comments?
give her a real hard
Oh,
question. Come on,
I'll
guys.
answer I know the hard question, so I'm going to answer it. So, number one is, there is no one more interested in solving the issues of reciprocity than the government side. And the reason is, it's because especially in a time of dynamism in terms of mission needs, the private sector is a huge provider of the talent we need. And agility and nimbleness cannot be accomplished if we can't move. So reciprocity is huge. We didn't talk about that. It tends to go back to these standards.
That was my question.
Yeah, it does tend to go back to these standards.
Why does it take so long?
Because everyone has the standards and who's taking the risk, right? Well, it really does come back to, we've got to get to a common view of what the risk elements are so that we don't have individual organizations.
Before you get off, because I
Yes.
want you just to share, make some real news here again, because
Okay.
I love you doing that.
Yeah, I
So
know.
if
I love Senator Warner.
we've done a lot of work
We
together.
have done a
So
lot of work.
if you have this goal, which I thought
Right.
was really great, of having these common standards by the end
Right.
of the year, could you give us an aspirational goal that would say X percent of agencies involved, recognizing there'll be outliers? Is it safe to say that we'll have 60%, 70% of DOD and IC with some level of reciprocity by end of first quarter next calendar year, by mid-year next calendar year? Give us something that we can shoot for.
I don't ever want to lie to you, so I'm going to try and not sound hedgy and sound true.
Now
I
you're sounding like a
No,
politician.
I believe we will have, in this coming year, agreed to standards that are promulgated in a policy document. I do. Now,
This fiscal year or this coming calendar year?
I'm gonna say fiscal year because
Fiscal
we're
year,
early.
good, good.
If we're later, I might have to go to calendar year because I believe we'll have those. What we have to get better at is the accountability for following the standards and then the understanding of why it is that they're not. I don't think we have a bunch of agencies that are dilettantes. I believe that everyone's trying to do the best job for the nation. But once we have the standards, then you have to work on accountability to find that they're met.
And Sue, we've talked about that.
Yes, ma'am.
And obviously, we all here want you to think about how are you going to enforce that across the agencies?
Right, and it really does come down to, again, it's not willful disobedience. It is about this notion of convincing people that there is a different way that we can understand risk. That's the standards-based. Give them some tools. We're already beginning with CE, and then make sure that within their own organizations, and again, the intelligence community is not the big issue. There are a lot of agencies involved here who don't all have the resources that we do in order to make this happen. And even within the intelligence community that has resources, to get the resources devoted to this new way of dealing with data is the big move, but we have initiatives placed against that. So you ought to expect the standards, you ought to expect us to be able to measure them, and then I'll give you a better view of when I can be confident that we have them in place. But reciprocity, real deal. But there is a gap between the people who have to assume the risk and the tools they need in order to be confident in that risk, and that's what we're trying to close. I'm grateful for your interest. This is a really important issue for all of us. Like I said, it just comes down to national security, and we're all kind of in favor of that. We're running the risk of not being able to use the talent that we know is existent if we don't solve this problem. And I love both my country and solving problems, so the pressure these two put on me is welcome, even if it's vexing. I appreciate your interest. Let's keep the conversation going. I really do think we have it. And it's 600,000, not 660.
Was that 600? So we've gone from 740 to
And we
660
think,
to 600?
And we think by the spring, with
By-
the help,
so-
and we think by the spring, with the help of the department, that we'll be down maybe half that much by the spring. again.
So we'll be at 300,000
I
by
hope
the
so.
spring. Take it from Sue Gordon
so.
right here.
I hope so. Hold us to
And
the
that
standard.
means, of course, most of those are on the DOD side of the house. So Kernan's going to kill you.
Exactly. Thank you all so much for being here. As always. Kevin? Oh, thanks. The answer to everything is in here. All right, thank you all.
Good
What am I
luck at
getting
that
for Christmas?
PC.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
And if you can stop some of that tweetage going forward from your next meeting, that would be great too.
Okay, still plenty to talk about. Let's talk about equal treatment for contractors, for our industry partners. Senator Warner, the bill that is awaiting the Senate floor includes a provision requiring consistent treatment of government and contractor employees. What led the committee to put that language in the bill?
What led was the fact that as bad as the problem is on people who serve in the government, as frankly, most of you know, it's even worse on the contractor side. And the kind of absurdity we had in some of our public testimony, some of the notion that if you are working, as you move from one contract to another, still within DHS, it's taking 120, 150 days. That is not fair to the contractor. It's frankly not fair to the taxpayer because you're not getting the value that you should be getting. And since this is going to be an ongoing public-private responsibility, and if we wanted to try to kind of start with everybody in the bucket and then carve out exemptions, as opposed to the other way around, which is everybody carves out their own space And there's very little commonality. We thought we needed to go ahead and, not just state this as policy, but state it as law.
I thought you were going to say it was because of Kevin.
Well, they were pretty convincing as well.
So Kevin, how do you see this being manifested, and how do you see the bill helping?
So first of all, the bill and the NDAA from last year that had additional language, as well as the president's management agenda, there's a lot of movement to get this addressed. As a CEO, and the CEO is working this, the assumption is, and we really believe this, that if you're going to contract something out, it's because there's a critical need. I either need a ship, a plane, a satellite today, or I need a critical information system, or I need a new software tool, and I need that developed to meet mission demand that is important to national security. And within that, you hire people based on the inability of the government to get it, high demand resources, or you hire them because there's a surge that is not permanent, say war operations, right? Everything we assume we receive as a contractor is important. So when we come in and say we need a clearance or we need slots, just basic slots to get people cleared, and we can't get the slots, or we can't get them prioritized on a mission need because they're not as important as other mission needs, then we're not able to meet the requirement. So the desire is, can we be treated equally? And if the government has to make a mission-based decision on priority, do it that way, not on what color uniform they wear.
And so we are certainly interested in seeing this bill
As a matter of
pass.
fact, one of the things I believe it will get done. The issue is one outstanding issue. If perchance it were not to get done, we will take the Title VI of the bill, the security clearance portions, and run it as a separate bill. We need to make this the components of this legislation law, and we've got pieces in the IC 18 authorization. We're going to even go further in the 19. So we've really got the committee as again, and I want to give Richard Burr credit, I want to give everybody on the committee credit. The committee recognizes how important this is to our national security, and we want to, and unless we put this in the legislative language and put real measurable metrics, this will get talked about, but the results will get pushed. Now, again, Sue and I worked together on a lot of issues over the years, but I think we've really got someone who gets it, who brings a wealth of experience in Sue Gordon, and I think Joe Kernan on the DoD side, where obviously a lot of the numbers are as well, gets it as well. We've got to make sure that MBIB, as it moves over to the DoD side, that process move, that entity, doesn't become an excuse for slowing this process down.
Well, Senator, I think we all know that which gets measured gets done. Having the bill pass, even as a separate bill, is probably music to everyone's ears here. How many legislative days are left? And you want to wager a guess as to whether or not we're really going to see some legislation on this?
I feel that there is not controversy about these changes. They were
Bipartisan.
unanimously adopted. Obviously, the House bill has got them in. So I'm, even with Congress's stellar record of getting things done, I'll put this one in a much more likely than not category to get done. I still hope
Okay.
it'll be done in the IA itself.
Well, we hope so too. There's a number of other
Other
very
very
important
important things in
provisions
that bill.
in there, yes. So we've mentioned clearance in person a little bit. Could each of you talk about your views on clearance in person, what that will bring to the community, and perhaps what some of your concerns are about that? And just in case anyone is not up on clearance in person, it's the notion that someone's clearance is attached to themselves. So it's much like a military rank, It's not linked to or dependent upon a particular position or contract. You take your clearance with you as you move. From my standpoint, it would certainly enable moving between government and industry and back again. It's something that I've long thought would be good. But I'd like to get your
Let me start on
views.
that. This is a reflection of not only the changes that are going on in government and in the private sector. I mean, this is the changing nature of work. I mean, there's going to be very few of us that are going to go work for the same company at the same basic position for 38 years the way my dad did. And what we need to bring to almost the whole notion of work is the notion of portability. I mean, I've been spending a lot of time over the last 3 years kind of trying to, kind of big subject, but how do you make capitalism work for a broader group of people in America in the 21st century? Part of that means when we've got right now in America, a third of our workforce is in some level of contingent work, either independent contractors, part-time work, gig workers, you name it. Yet we have no social safety net for those workers. I've been working a lot on portable benefits. The equivalent of portable benefits would be this notion of attaching your security clearance to you as a person, and it allows you to move, because many, again, of Kevin's workers are going to make that transition back and forth between government and the private sector. They're going to have a variety of contracts. And if we can have those, if we have reciprocity, common standards, and continuous evaluation so that we are getting, the individual is being continuously evaluated rather than we're going to go review your background every 5 years, whether you need to or not. I think we can make this a reality. Now, we may need, and this gets into our privacy area, we may need to look at more avenues of information about that individual, and I think a lot of that will go to the social media question in terms of folks' willingness to have access to have that information. But it just is where the whole world is headed, not just the question on security clearances.
Kevin.
So my view is clearance in person and reciprocity is the number one issue that the CEO community had, but it's a result of all the other indicators driving towards a lack of movement. Clearance in person addresses that. I was in the military, I was in the reserves, and when I got out of the reserves, I went to the independent or individual ready reserves for 6 years. There should be an equivalent of individual ready reserves for people who are already determined to be trustworthy, so that if they need to come back into the trusted workforce, and they've been out not doing anything that would breach their trust, right, because they haven't had access to data, they should be able to come back in, because this is going to be a supply and demand gap for the people with the capabilities we need for years to come. We have to recognize that this is a talent gap. If we find a trusted individual, we should do everything we can to make sure that trusted individual is available in the future and allow them a career opportunity and growth wherever agency, government, contract community they can go. It's that simple. It's a hard thing to do because people are assuming a lack of trust. But if we don't do that, we just don't have the capability and the technologists inside of the trusted workforce to do what we need to do as a nation.
And this, just to drive Kevin's point home, and one of the reasons I think we have such a strong ally in Dan Coats is that Dan went from being a member of the Intelligence Committee, hearing everything, to where he then stopped being senator, January of 2017, was named ODNI director, and had a, 30 to 60 day period where he couldn't do any part of his job because he had to go through a completely fresh, total security clearance process. So he lived the absurdity of what we are talking about, how you go from being in the room on virtually everything other than Gang of Eight to basically being viewed as NUCO employee number one, and none of that transferring over was just absurd.
Yes. Has anyone in the audience not had an issue with your security clearance? Okay. I think we're probably all fans
Can I
of
make an important
clearance
distinction?
in person. Yes,
So last
Kevin.
year in industry, the industry executives got together and did an estimate that 95% or more of the clearances in 2017 that were done were for existing cleared staff. So only 5% new.
And is that because it is so hard to
Because-
get through the process?
And we're repeating the process from
Yes.
every time you move from one contract to
Yes.
another, agency to agency. People
Yes.
repeat in, they look at it again. There's an assumption of distrust, not an assumption of trust, and therefore you can't get any new in. And at the end of the day, getting new talent in is the most important discussion industry wants to have.
And one of the again, metrics we had out of the agency was they were citing that 535 days before a new agent could actually be fully vetted and cleared before that young, bright person could join the CIA. That is a national security threat by not attracting the best talent possible, because people cannot, from a career choice and frankly even from an affordability choice, have that long to wait.
I think we all have many stories of young folks coming out of university who give up.
Right.
Because they need a paycheck. So Senator Warner, you mentioned social media, and actually we mentioned it earlier here this morning. In 2017, the DNI, after consulting with Congress, issued a policy on the use of publicly available social media information, such as any information on individuals' social media that they haven't put the privacy controls on. So it's out there, it's publicly available. And that the policy allowed all agencies to use that type of data in background investigations. But virtually none of our agencies have done that so far. Now, the first part of this question obviously was for Sue. Why not? What's lacking? But let's assume that that someone is implementing it. The policy is out there to be implemented. Kevin, I'd like to hear from you on what industry is doing, and then Senator Warner, I'd like to hear from you on, what concerns do you have, and to what extent do you think social media could be used in background investigations?
Okay. So and I'm going to start with what we'd hope that something that's set as a directive becomes required versus desired by the agencies receiving it.
Okay.
So that industry knows the
So
common
first is a
standard,
requirement.
required versus desired when the executive agent sends it out, so that we all know what the standard is we have to meet to, and therefore we can adopt it inside of our company and utilize it. There are 23 different agencies with 20 different adjudication processes, and they have different interpretations of the Privacy Act against people who have signed waivers for positions of trust. We have to bring that together, agree what that looks like, so that industry and the agencies can more uniformly do that. And my simple view is we should be able to see everything, if it's within the law, that are those nations that pose a threat to the nation can for people who hold a position of trust. How do we get there, and how do we know what that standard is, so that we can not only get new talent in, but get the bad talent out, identify it and get it out. That's just as important in this discussion as whenever we get the trust we need.
Are you doing any social media
We are.
monitoring
We do.
today?
Absolutely.
And do you do that before you hire?
Yes,
even,
we do
as part of your hiring
whatever we
decision?
think we can do within the legal framework to pre-vet a candidate, because it's so hard to get them through the process. We do.
You do, okay.
That includes background investigations, that includes social media checks, anything that we think within the laws that we can do, we do, because it takes so long. Putting somebody in a slot to get cleared is gold. We have to wait.
Right.
And I think I wish Sue was here, because I think probably I would like to hear why so few agencies have used this tool, just because they're probably afraid to wade into it at this point in time. But if there's one thing I think that we have seen, for a long time we commended the enormous ability of social media to connect people. But I think we've seen over the last few years the dark underbelly of social media and how it can be used to pit one another against each other. I think again, not to refer back to the tragedies of the last 2 weeks, the fact that people can go out and find like-minded haters as easily as they can in today's internet world is something I think we have to sort through. I put out a white paper that had 20 ideas that laid out a menu of options that I think policymakers ought to be considering as we sort through what the rules ought to be on social media. Because one of the questions becomes not only what this individual posts, he or she, in their kind of public persona, but do we have a right to know if this individual is creating fake identities the way our adversaries did and when they attacked us? And the Russian playbook is now out and being used by other nations as well to try to intervene. Do we have a right to know, just as individuals, one of the things I found pretty common agreement from, that we should have a right to know when we're contacted, whether we're being contacted by a human being or a bot. There's nothing inherently wrong with being contacted by a machine or by a bot, but should we have that right to be able to have that distinguishing characteristic? Should we have a geolocator? So if somebody says they're, Sue Gordon, transmitting a message from McLean, Virginia, but it's originating in St. Petersburg, should that come up? And I think you're going to also see a whole a movement as we, and California's done some of this already. You've got kind of the whole privacy, but the flip side of privacy with GDPR is actually much more data transparency. One of the things I think that would help educate all of us as we use social media. Most Americans assume, oh, this is great, Facebook, Google, Twitter, they're free. They're not free. All of these entities are sucking information, data points out of us. I think we need much more transparency on what information these companies have on us. I think along with data transparency ought to come pricing transparency. If we knew that Tish's data was worth $18 a month to Facebook and Mark's data is worth $22 a month, that might create a whole new system between the user and the social media platform where people will come in and provide some protections. And I think Kevin ought to, if your potential employees, if that information was available to the employees, I think it ought to be then potentially available to employers as well. I think we need data portability. I used to be an old telecom guy. Some of you are old enough to remember in this room when it used to be hard to move from one telco to another until we had number portability. If we have data portability, that may create new competitive pressures on some of the platforms that overly dominate. I'm not saying every bit of this information needs to be made totally available, but if foreign adversaries can get access to all this information about your employees, well, within certain appropriate parameters, if they want to work for the government in a trusted position, whether it's on the governmental side or on the private sector side, the enterprise writ large ought to be able to have access to some of this information as well.
Well said. We probably have time for one, maybe two more questions. So if you have any questions, please get them to the aisles. And there are quite a few that are really for Sue. She did say she would answer questions, so we will get these to her, and then we will post them on the INSA website, I believe. So I am reading them all. So if you have any more, please pass them to the aisles. A couple more here. Senator Warner, and you talked about this, but one from the audience. IRTPA required reciprocal recognition of clearances. Kevin, you've talked about reciprocity.
That was 2004, wasn't it?
That was 2004. So we have it. We have it in law. We also have it in D&I policy and probably in DOD policy. So if it's in law, Senator Warner, does that mean maybe the law needs to be updated, or perhaps, as the questioner asks, step up on oversight
You know, I know
on
that-
what's happening.
I know that you're kind of still new to this process, and I don't want to break it to
Yeah.
you, but just because it's in statute
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean it's done.
Trust me.
So, you know, because, well, what industry? Because we absolutely believe, when we were at 740,000 backlog, that's insane. So I think the most powerful way that we can make this happen, not just in statute, but in reality, is once again, make these reforms that have already been in NDAA, but also in the IA. But equally, if not more important, is for me and Chairman Burr and the rest of our committee to just stay on the IC on an absolute regular basis. And Sue and I have gone through a variety of projects before. You recall some of our days on overhead.
Oh, I recall those
where,
fondly,
you know,
fondly.
You know, there's nothing, there is an extraordinarily important role for oversight here to keep pushing. And that not in a negative context. I think, you know, Sue and I think Joe Kernan on the DOD side, they want that ongoing attention from Congress because that allows them to keep pressure on both all of their respective agencies that falls within their purview, but also it allows them to, you know, keep pressure as need be with our private sector partners.
Closing comments, thoughts. What's your biggest concern? What keeps you up at night? Or what's the easiest thing that could be done that would go a long way to getting your folks cleared? Kevin.
Somehow, and I don't know how to do this, and this is the whole argument, how do we move from a position of assuming no trust to assuming a position of trust when people are moved? And how do we make sure as a community, anybody who owns a trusted individual does everything they can to get the data to decide whether they're a risk to the nation? Those two back-end issues fix the trust on the front end. And everything takes care of itself. But that's why the information sharing, those two things, the whole assumption is we cannot get this addressed without awareness, but also recognizing we have to share information and share the risk associated with untrustworthy individuals and how to get them addressed and identified too. So that's a big deal.
And essentially turn it on end.
Yeah, one of the things that Kevin just mentioned there, it's really important that we've not really brought up at this point, is this information sharing. So if you spot bad indicators, you can actually share that with the government or other folks. I mean, if we look at the insider threats on the contractor side, every one of the individuals that has come to light has had some prior history that should have been a red flag, that should have been signaled to another contractor or signaled back to the government, so that individual was not continuing in that trusted position. And I think that's one area that we've not spent as much time on, and I'm wide open for business if there's more things we need to do legislatively on that issue, number one. Number two, we've talked a lot about DOD and the IC. I think they've both got religion at this point. I think we need to stay on the pack in terms of making sure this is government-wide. I think that OMB has gotten better, but they were late to the dance in terms of recognizing they've got a critical role in this. Trying to be equal opportunity offender here. I think DHS is still not got their, I'm not sure they fully acknowledge the extent of the problem. And we need their oversight committees and, if not their committees, us to try to find an angle to get DHS at the table as well. And then whether it's Sue or Joe, we can't, you can have a bad month, but we can't have a bad quarter in terms of bringing these numbers down in terms of the current backlog, actually getting us towards this, secret in 30 days, top secret in 90 days. And boy, oh boy, I'm glad Sue said it in front of everybody here, making sure we get all those common requirements written out by the end of the year, and then holding y'all's feet and the various agencies' feet to make sure there is that commonality by middle of next calendar year, I think we got to stay on that. Because this, my concern is without constant, we talk about continuous evaluation, without constant focus, and I know Kevin and industry will keep the focus, but without constant focus, my fear is that this is not the area that is prime on most agency heads' agendas, but we got to keep it in their face in a positive way on an ongoing basis.
Well, it's critical to the mission. As we have all said, as we said at the outset, as it has come clear through all of the discussion, it is absolutely critical to the success of the mission, if you will. And we didn't talk a whole lot about information sharing. It is in your bill, a required information sharing program with metrics. So Senator Warner, thanks to you and the committee for writing that into the bill.
And I've got both John and Mike from the committee here. If you have other ideas or suggestions, we are wide open for business on what we do in the next authorization bill on a going forward basis. If we haven't hit all the high points and there's something we're missing, please let us know.
Well, thank you. And really, the audience thanks you. The community thanks you because we need this focus. This has been an issue for a long time. We clearly haven't been able to fix it ourselves all these years, so sometimes it takes that outside impetus to make it happen. The numbers are coming down. NBIB is making really good progress in their business process reengineering, and I know we are all looking forward to the executive order, which will outline the transfer of NBIB to the Department of Defense. And hopefully over the next couple of months, we'll do another very similar discussion like this, and we'll add OMB as well as DOD to the stage. So Senator Warner, we hope you will come back. Kevin, we know that you will continue to lead this charge for industry, and we thank you very much.
Thank you.
A big thanks to everyone
Thank
for
you
being
all.
here.
Thank you.